When a woman insulted a quiet old man in a first-class line, she never expected his response to leave her speechless until she realized who he was. The airport was alive with the energy of a busy morning. Families herded kids clutching backpacks and stuffed animals. Business travelers balanced phone calls with coffee cups, and the overhead announcements added a steady background hum to the chaos amidst this organized frenzy. A blonde woman in her early 40s strode through the terror with an air of purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored blazer and designer jeans, her handbag a symbol of understated luxury, swinging lightly at her side. Everything about her screamed confidence, from her poised posture to the way her eyes barely flicked toward the people she passed. She approached the first-class boarding line, pausing just long enough to adjust the strap of her handbag. Her gaze quickly swept over the small queue ahead, assessing her competition for priority seating. It wasn't a long line, but something caught her attention. A man standing at the very front. His back was turned, but his figure stood out. He wasn't tall or imposing, but there was a sturdiness about him even as he stood still. He wore a worn leather jacket, a faded shirt, and jeans that had clearly seen their fair share of years. He carried a small, unassuming bag slung over his shoulder. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Nothing that matched the polished image the blonde woman likely associated with first-class travel. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she took in the sight. She couldn't help herself. She sighed audibly loud enough for anyone nearby to notice. With a quick glance at the boarding sign as if to confirm she was indeed in the right line, she muttered under her breath, "Why do they let just anyone in first class these days?" The words weren't particularly loud, but they carried a sharp edge. A couple standing behind her exchanged a glance, but said nothing. The man at the front of the line didn't turn around, though. There was a subtle shift in his stance, almost imperceptible, as if he'd heard, but chose not to react. The woman clicked her tongue softly, her impatience growing. She shifted her weight to one foot, the toe of her designer heel tapping lightly on the floor. A small gesture, but one that spoke volumes about her irritation. She wasn't used to waiting, and certainly not behind someone she had already judged unworthy of standing in that line. A gate agent moved into position, preparing to begin the boarding process. The blonde woman glanced at her watch, then at the man again, her frustration simmering just below the surface. She tilted her head slightly, her expression a mix of disbelief and annoyance. She muttered again, louder this time. What's the point of first class if they're just going to let anyone in? Her voice carried farther than she intended, drawing the attention of a few more passengers nearby. Some looked away quickly, unwilling to involve themselves in whatever was unfolding. Others, however, lingered a moment longer, curious about how the scene might play out. Still, the man at the front of the line didn't react. His stillness only seemed to fuel her irritation further. The atmosphere grew tense, like the charged air before a storm. The woman's presence, once commanding and confident, now felt overbearing, her words laced with entitlement. Yet despite her visible attempts to assert dominance over the moment, the man remained a picture of calm. He adjusted the strap of his bag but didn't so much as glance back. And while the blonde woman saw only an unremarkable figure in front of her, everyone else was about to witness the moment when assumptions collided with reality. The blonde woman's patience, thin as it was to begin with, now seemed to be wearing away completely. Her foot tapping grew more pronounced, each sharp click echoing against the polished tile floor. She cast another glance at the old man ahead, her eyes narrowing slightly as if his very presence was an affront to her carefully curated world. Unbelievable, she muttered. Around here, like you're untouchable. Melania didn't flinch. Her calm demeanor, far from diffusing the situation, seemed to fuel the woman's anger. You've hurt so many people. Do you even care? Or are you just another symbol of privilege, pretending to understand the rest of us? The tension was palpable now, almost suffocating. Every eye in the boutique was fixed on the confrontation. The air filled with murmurs, and the faint clicks of phone cameras capturing the moment the employees stood, frozen, unsure whether to step in or let the drama play out. Then, without warning, the woman took a step closer, invading Melania's personal space. Her gestures became more erratic, her voice trembling as she spoke. "People like me, we're the ones who suffer, while people like you just exist. You have no idea what it's like to be on the other side." The words carried a weight that silenced even the whispering crowd. It was clear this was about more than just Melania. The woman's anger came from a deeper place, a frustration that had long been building now, unleashed on a symbol she couldn't ignore. Melania stood firm, her gaze steady. "I understand you're angry," she began, her voice measured, "but this isn't the way to. Don't you dare tell me how." To feel the woman interrupted her voice, rising to a shout. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured around the room. "You walk around with your head high while the rest of us are struggling. Do you even see us? Do you care?" The crowd was now a sea of phones, their lenses capturing every second of the heated exchange. Some onlookers whispered their support for Melania, while others nodded in agreement with the woman's fiery words. The atmosphere was electric charged, with opposing emotions, but just as the tension seemed ready to boil over, a voice from the crowd rang out, cutting through the chaos. "Like a knife, that's enough." The voice belonged to someone unexpected, and as the crowd turned to see who had spoken, the entire dynamic of the scene shifted in an instant. The voice belonged to an elderly man, his presence commanding immediate attention. Despite his unassuming appearance, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and khakis, he had the kind of quiet authority that stopped people in their tracks. His silver hair gleamed under the boutique's lighting as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning both Melania and the woman with a calm intensity. "That's enough," he repeated, this time more firmly. The crowd parted slightly to let him through, their curiosity now tinged with surprise. The woman, startled by the interruption, turned to face him. "And who are you supposed to be?" she snapped, her anger still simmering. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he looked her directly in the eye and said, "I'm someone who's tired of seeing people tear each other apart. We've all got our frustrations, but this isn't the way to fix anything." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth for a moment. Even the woman seemed at a loss for a response. The crowd, once buzzing with whispered opinions, fell silent, their attention now fully on the man. He turned to Melania, his voice softening. "And you, Mrs. Trump, this is a moment for understanding, not pride. If you're willing, maybe you can show the rest of us what grace looks like." Melania's expression shifted slightly, her composure cracking, just enough to reveal a glimmer of vulnerability. She nodded slowly, her voice steady as she said, "I am listening." The woman, still visibly upset, crossed her arms. "Listening, that's easy to say. But do you even care about what's happening to people like me?" The man stepped closer, his tone empathetic but firm. "She's here, isn't she, right now? She's standing in front of you, not walking away. That counts for something. Maybe instead of shouting, you can tell her, tell all of us what you're really feeling." The woman hesitated, her anger faltering as the weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. The crowd watched intently, their earlier judgment replaced by a quiet anticipation. "I'm tired," she finally admitted, her voice cracking. "I'm tired of seeing people like her. People with everything, walking around like nothing's wrong while we're struggling to get by. It's not fair." "Fair?" The man nodded, his expression kind. "It isn't, but blaming one person for all the world's problems doesn't make it better. Conversations like this, right here, they can make a difference if we let them." The woman looked at Melania, her anger now replaced by uncertainty. And for the first time, Melania stepped forward, her words offering a bridge where before there had only been division. Melania took a small step forward, her gaze steady and sincere as she addressed the woman. "Directly, you're right," she began, her voice soft but Resolute life isn't fair, and it's true that I have privileges. Many people don't, but I don't walk around pretending nothing is wrong. I see the struggles, the pain, even if it's not always my own. Her words were calm, but they carried a weight that silenced even the skeptics in the crowd. The woman blinked her defensive stance, softening ever so slightly. I can't fix everything, Melania continued, but that doesn't mean I don't care if I didn't. I wouldn't be standing here listening to you trying to understand. You have every right to your feelings, and I respect that. But maybe we can use this moment to see each other as people, not enemies. The woman hesitated, her emotions visibly wearing. Within her, she glanced at the elderly man who gave her an encouraging nod, and then back at Melania. It just feels like no one listens, like no one really sees us, she admitted, her voice cracking. Melania stepped even closer, her presence now commanding, but compassionate. I see you and I hear you, she said simply. Tell me what you need me to understand. Not as someone you're angry at, but as someone who's willing to listen. The raw sincerity in her tone seemed to break through the woman's defenses. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took a shaky breath. We're just trying to make it to feel like we matter. It feels like no one cares unless you're rich or powerful. And I don't know how to stop feeling so invisible. For the first time, the tension in the room began to dissolve. The crowd, once eager for drama, now watched with quiet reverence. The elderly man stepped back, his intervention complete, as the focus shifted entirely to the two women. Melania nodded, her expression empathetic. I don't have all the answers, she admitted. But I do believe we're stronger when we talk to each other, not past each other. Maybe today can be a start. The woman wiped her eyes, her anger replaced by a tentative hope. Maybe, she said softly. The crowd seemed to collectively exhale, the atmosphere now charged with a different energy. A shared understanding that they had witnessed something rare. A genuine moment of connection in the midst of chaos. As the crowd began to disperse, the air in the boutique felt lighter, almost transformed. Shoppers exchanged glances, some even sharing quiet smiles. The tension that had filled the space moments ago had given way to a rare sense of unity. People weren't just leaving with shopping bags, they were leaving with a story, one that carried a message far greater than the scene they had just witnessed. The woman still standing near Melania seemed calmer. Now her posture had softened, her earlier frustration replaced by something else entirely, a quiet introspection. She looked at Melania, who extended a hand not as a gesture of formality, but as a human connection. Thank you for speaking your truth, Melania said. It's not easy to confront someone, and I appreciate your honesty. The woman hesitated for a moment before taking her hand. And thank you for listening. I didn't expect that, she admitted. I thought you'd just walk away. Melania smiled faintly, her grip firm but gentle. Walking away never solves anything. As the woman left the boutique, the elderly man, who had intervened earlier, caught Melania's eye. He gave her a small nod of approval, a quiet acknowledgement of her grace under pressure. She returned the gesture with a slight smile, then turned her attention back to the handbag she had been browsing. Earlier, for the onlookers, it wasn't just an altercation. It was a moment that reminded them of the power of empathy, of standing firm but open in the face of conflict. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about recognizing the humanity in each other, even when emotions ran high. Moments like this don't just happen. They teach us something in a world so often divided by anger and misunderstanding. Perhaps the greatest strength we can show is choosing connection over conflict. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire challenge and remind us of the power of human connection and carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had nothing to prove. You know, he began his words, cutting through the stunned silence. Like a knife, I've learned something in all my years. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how fancy your clothes are, or what ticket you're holding. Respect, that's what separates the decent from the rest. His words weren't loud, but they carried an impact far greater than volume could provide. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His voice, steeped in a lifetime of experience, made it impossible to dismiss or ignore. The blonde woman's cheeks flushed a deeper red. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could she say? The very man she had so arrogantly dismissed moments earlier had just turned her entire argument on its head, with a single devastatingly calm statement around them. The murmurs grew louder. People were pulling out their phones, some discreetly snapping photos or recording the scene, but no one interrupted. It was as if the entire line understood they were witnessing something more significant than a petty airport altercation. You don't judge people by how they look. Clint continued, his gaze unwavering. You judge them by how they treat others. That's the only standard that's ever mattered, and the only one that ever will. The woman's composure crumbled further. Her arms, once defiantly crossed, now hung limply at her sides. She glanced around nervously, her earlier arrogance now replaced by a visible discomfort. She wanted to melt into the floor to undo the words she had spoken. But there was no escape from the weight of Clint's words or the judgmental stares of the people around her. For Clint, it wasn't about humiliating her. He wasn't angry or spiteful. There was no malice in his tone, only a quiet conviction that came from years of living by the very principles he was now preaching. His words weren't meant to wound, they were meant to teach. But even though he had made his point, Clint wasn't finished. His next words would deliver a lesson that no one there would ever forget. The silence that followed Clint's words was deafening. It was as if the entire airport terminal had paused to witness the moment, the weight of his statement settling heavily over everyone within earshot. The blonde woman stood, frozen, her polished facade completely shattered. The confidence that once radiated from her was now replaced by a palpable discomfort. She shifted awkwardly on her heels, her gaze flickering to the floor as if searching for an escape route. Clint didn't move right away. His piercing gaze lingered on her for just a moment longer, not in anger, but as if to give her time to absorb his words. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, he turned back toward the gate agent, his presence commanding even in its quietness. The blonde woman, however, was left grappling with her own emotions. Her face was flushed, and the air of superiority she had carried earlier was now completely gone. She was no longer the self-assured traveler who had strutted to the front of the line, confident in her place among the elite. Instead, she looked vulnerable, exposed. The realization of who she had assaulted and the gravity of his response had hit her like a tidal wave around them. The crowd began to stir. The whispers grew louder as people exchanged glances and murmured their disbelief. Some were still trying to process the surreal moment of seeing Clint Eastwood in person. Others were marveling at the unexpected moral lesson that had just unfolded in front of them. Did you hear what he said? That was incredible. I've always admired him. But seeing this, wow, she deserved it though, didn't she? Well, maybe she'll think twice next time. The woman could feel the judgmental stares of the other passengers. Every whispered comment seemed to pierce her like a dagger, each one reminding her of her earlier arrogance. She had been so quick to judge, so eager to assert her own status, and now she was paying the price. But it wasn't just the embarrassment that stung. It was the truth in Clint's words. As the gate agent called for first-class board, Clint stepped forward. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered once throughout the entire ordeal. Just as he handed over his ticket, he paused, glancing back at the blonde woman who was now standing awkwardly to the side. "Go ahead," he said, his voice steady and without an ounce of sarcasm. "Take my spot." The crowd's collective gasp was almost audible. No one had expected that. Not after what she had said. Not after how she had acted. Even the woman herself seemed stunned. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't move, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Seriously. Clint added a faint smile, tugging at the corners of his lips. "Go on, you look like you're in a hurry." The words were simple, but the gesture carried a profound weight. It wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a lesson in humility, a final reminder of what respect truly meant. The blonde woman hesitated. Her cheeks still burning with shame, she glanced at Clint. "So,